This conference will now be recorded.
So some
Okay.
things are pretty consistent and come up every session, and we're always hit with some new things every session. So we'll be prepared for those as we head into next year. Just very briefly about Civic Point, so you know who's representing you. We are affiliated with a law firm called Cross Brown Todd. For those of you in the Southwest Ohio area, you might know us more. We have a large Cincinnati office, a Westchester office, and a Columbus office. But what you might not know is that we also have offices in, I think we're up to 10 states now, sort of through the Midwest, Texas, Colorado, West Virginia, Pennsylvania. And we do some of our folks do some work in DC. So we just share that to say if there's ever a need, certainly in our surrounding states, or if you have businesses that are on the border or maybe cross over into Indiana or Kentucky or Pennsylvania, we also have colleagues in those states. So if you ever needed some help with something legislative or executive branch related, certainly give Kristen a call or give us a call. We'd be happy to help line you up with somebody in one of those states too. But we, so we can go on. Yeah, you can skip that one. We do a lot of work, obviously, in retail for you, and we do work in, healthcare and government and energy and environment and other topics, which makes it kind of exciting for us that we get to dabble in lots of different topics.
So Deb, if I can interrupt you. Yeah, so I think one of the things you've mentioned to us before is that what makes us a kind of a unique client, and Joe, you can certainly attest to this, is how many different topics we really do address. We are in anything and everything when it comes down there at the State House. Wouldn't you agree?
It's absolutely true. It's been helpful that we do work in a lot of those other subject matters, because it seems like there's almost always a connection to OGA as well. It could be in something energy and environment related. It could be something healthcare related with pharmacies or things like that. You never know. So a lot of times we find that something we're learning about for a different client is also applicable to OGA, and we can bring that information back to OGA when we're learning about it, maybe in a different context, which is really helpful. You all know sort of the results, or at least what everybody, the results of the presidential election. But, Ohio was really interesting with Trump getting 53% of the vote. The president won Ohio pretty handily. A lot of that seems to have been influenced by particularly our Northeast Ohio area, Mahoning Valley, places like that. Certainly turnout was very, very high, over 70%. And so it makes it interesting. A lot of people have been talking about Ohio and, well, okay, is it now firmly a red state, or is it still a toss-up state? And, some say, no, it's firmly a red state. Others say it kind of remains to be seen, in that there were these parts of the state that supported the president initially when he was first elected and supported him in this election. And it'll be interesting to see when there are different candidates in the future, whether those voting patterns remain consistent, or if maybe more traditional sort of moderate Democrats who would typically have voted Democrat in the past and crossed over for Trump, whether or not they'll consider going back. Probably depends on, who the candidates are, obviously. So, is it firmly a red state forever, or is it possible that it gets more sort of that bellwether status again? I think it remains to be seen, but certainly these last two elections have been more significant in terms of those Republican victories. The one thing that some were watching was sort of our congressional makeup. So we have 16 congressional seats, which will probably go down when we head into redistricting next year. But of those, 12 are Republicans and 4 are Democrats. There was little risk in most of those districts during this election, but there was one in Southwest Ohio, Steve Shabbat, the congressman from the Cincinnati area. That was a race that people, frankly, at one time were calling for his opponent, saying that the opponent had a slight edge, and then it kind of waffled back and forth. Ultimately, he hung on to win that race. I think he had 52% of the vote in that race. So what that really means is that the congressional makeup for Ohio did not change in this race. The other thing that isn't going to be immediately obvious, but something that we'll continue to work on and talk with you about in the future, was we were following the Ohio Supreme Court races. There were two incumbent members, Sharon Kennedy and Judy French, that were up for re-election. Generally speaking, and this is, again, broadly, the business community got pretty involved in supporting both of those candidates to try to keep them on the bench. While their party affiliation isn't shown, they are both Republicans. And the business community was expressing some concerns that there is a 5-2 majority right now of Republicans on the court, and there was a concern about losing both of those seats and switching the court back politically. Their concerns stem from previous cases, previous years, where they felt like there was a very active court, perhaps legislating from the bench, and a concern about that. So they wanted to try to maintain the makeup of the Ohio Supreme Court. As you may know, we kind of got a split on that one, where Sharon Kennedy, one of those incumbents, ended up retaining her seat, and she'll remain on the court. But Judy French did not win. She was defeated by Jennifer Bruner, who is probably also someone know well or have heard of, having served in state government, previously Secretary of State, and she's been on the 10th Circuit for the last several years. So she ended up winning that race. So now the Ohio Supreme Court is a 4-3 Republican majority. And so watching cases and how the court particularly will interpret legislative efforts and how they will rule on constitutionality issues of bills coming out of the legislature, that margin gets closer, and some of those issues could go in a way that maybe isn't as complimentary sometimes to the business community. So they held on to the majority, but they would have preferred to hold a bigger majority, frankly. So that's kind of what happened at that level. I think if we go to the next slide, that Joe's going to tell you a little bit more about what happened here at the State House closer to home.
Thanks, Deb, and great to be with you all here virtually this morning. Yeah, and one other quick point to a lot of what Deb was talking about. I think particularly on a national scale, everybody learned how vote counting occurs in their state. Particularly, I mentioned that because in Ohio, to Deb's point about the Congressman Chavez race, a lot of the results we saw at the beginning were overwhelmingly in favor of Biden, and a lot of these other races were tilted one way. That's because Ohio counts all the absentee and early voting prior to election day and has those tallied and ready to go. And so that's not the case across the country, as I'm sure everybody knows. A lot of confusion in how different states operate. But I thought it was particularly interesting to watch that unfold in terms of how the results kind of played out throughout the state. But shifting gears to Ohio, I think surprise is the key word here. Particularly, you can look at it two ways. One, that there wasn't really any surprise. The status quo kind of maintained, particularly in the Ohio House and Senate. Or you can look at it that Republicans outperformed. And as you can see from the slide, they picked up seats in both the House and Senate. But I think it's important to note kind of the backdrop of 2020. Obviously, COVID was top of mind, but here in Ohio, things that were, I think, up against Republicans heading into the election, obviously the national scale with the presidential race, but we have our former speaker was indicted in the summer. And that obviously had a trickle-down effect on a lot of other things, but particularly it left a lot of chaos and the structure and resources available to Republicans heading into the fall by most accounts, the prediction was that Republicans would at least lose a couple seats in the Ohio House. And as you can tell, that didn't happen. So, and then coupled on the fact that everything surrounding House Bill 6 and the inaction in the legislature to really address that, that all was kind of the backdrop heading into the election. And one of the reasons why particularly there was a lot of surprise with how the results played out. So back to the previous slide real quick, Chris. As I mentioned, and as Deb mentioned, you can attribute a lot of the success to Trump being on the ballot. The areas where Republicans picked up seats were open seats in Northeast Ohio, Mahoning Valley, and obviously the rural counties turned out very high turnout in those areas, comparable to 2016 as well. So obviously there might be some recounts in the Ohio House, but they stand to gain a net of 3 seats heading into next year. Not quite a supermajority, but very close. And then in the Senate, which really wasn't in danger of shifting too drastically, the surprise again was that the Republicans picked up a seat in Northeast Ohio, Mahoning Valley area, and they padded their already substantial supermajority. And we actually just got notice yesterday that one of the very close races here in Franklin County, it looks like the Republican candidate is going to, Stephanie Coonsey, is going to hold on and win that race. That will head to a recount, but it's expected that she's gonna win that. So again, Republicans dominated the open seats. They performed very well in all the areas. They performed well in 16 and actually were able to pick up seats. So I think, Kristen, I don't know if there are any questions just generally on the elections before we kind of dive into what's happening at the State House.
So I had a couple. So Joe, can you go over, or Deb, I think if I read correctly, the leadership was kind of announced yesterday. So if you can maybe make a comment on that. And then if I also understand correctly, Householder did get reelected. And so what do you think the likelihood of them, ousting him, for lack of a better word? And then what would that mean for us, if anything?
Sure. I'll take the Householder one, Deb, if you want to do the election, leadership elections. So yes, Householder was reelected to his seat. I think there were a couple write-in candidates, but no really organized opposition to him. And he's actually been in attendance in House session since the fall, been showing up and voting. His case is still pending technically, so there are a lot of theories out there in terms of what, I don't want to speculate too much in terms of what the House Republicans or the House will do, but there is a rule in Ohio that if they were to oust Householder, if they were to oust Householder prior to the election and he won, then they couldn't remove him again after the election. So there's some speculation that they're waiting until the next General Assembly when he's actually sworn in, and then obviously pending the results of the case, which we don't know yet when that's going to be finalized or when his trial will end. I think they're going to kind of wait to see, and then there is some speculation that they might actually vote to remove him next year.
Okay, great, thanks.
On the leadership front, thanks. That's a good question. At this point, both the Senate and House Republicans majority leadership have determined who those will be. The minority Senate Democrats and House Democrats have not yet announced their votes for their leadership team. So in the Ohio Senate, starting with next session, Senator Matt Huffman from the Lima area will move up. He's already in leadership, but he'll move up and be the president of the Senate. And then the other folks in his leadership team will be Jay Hottinger from the Newark area, Rob McCauley from the Napoleon, Northwest Ohio area, and Kirk Shearing, who might be a name. He's from the Canton area, and he may be a familiar name. Kirk has been a member of the legislature both in the Ohio House and the Ohio Senate for, I think, decades now. So he's got a ton of experience. And he was the number 2 to Speaker Rosenberger a few years back. So he's highly regarded and highly respected, has a lot of experience. And Rob McCauley is new to the leadership team, new to a leadership role, and he's definitely somebody that is an advocate for less regulation. That's a big area that he focuses on. So that's what the Senate Republicans will look like. And then the House just announced that Bob Cupp, also from Lima, which is really interesting, who has been serving as Speaker since Larry Householder was removed from that position. Bob Cupp will be re-elected as Speaker for next session. And then his leadership team includes Tim Ginter from the I think it's Salem, Northeast Ohio, Salem, East Liverpool area. I think Salem is his hometown. And others on that leadership team will be Bill Seitz, who's a longstanding member in both chambers, who has been in leadership for as long as we can remember, from Cincinnati. And he will stay in the role he's been playing in leadership. And then Rick Carfagna, who many of you know, who owns Carfagna's and is obviously a good advocate and a wonderful friend to OGA. He's going to serve in leadership from the Central Ohio, Delaware, Ohio area. A gentleman named Don Jones, that's, some of you may know. And off the top of my head, I can't remember where Don is from. He's a teacher in the agricultural space, a real strong advocate in the ag world. And then finally, a woman named Cindy Abrams, who is a newer member, also from the Cincinnati area. She will be a new member of leadership there. So I think it's a good group, and I think it's great to have somebody like Rick join the leadership team in the House.
Absolutely. Thank you. Any other questions on the political side? All right. If not, take it away, guys.
All right. Well, so I don't need to tell all of you, but this has been quite an odd year. But that hasn't meant that OGA hasn't been busy at the State House. I think it was mentioned at the beginning in terms of the issues that OGA tracks and works on. That translates to a lot of legislation that we watch and advocate for or advocate against. And so, this year we've tracked over 100 bills in the Ohio General Assembly that have either been introduced or moved their way through. And I guess, obviously the everything kind of stemmed this year, and how odd it was with COVID. Everything kind of stemmed out of COVID in terms of what the General Assembly did. This is typically the second year out of a 2-year General Assembly here in Ohio. And that is typically because it is an election year, a condensed legislative calendar. But that was anything but condensed this year, just based on the fact that they didn't meet for a while because of COVID, came back, and we're dealing with different things related to COVID that I'll get into in a minute. And obviously they're still here right now, looking to finish up next month. So what have we been working on? What has OGA been working on? COVID, obviously when COVID first happened, our priority was to make sure that our members were, their concerns, initial concerns were recognized, but also that the supply chain and operations continued as is. So we worked diligently with the governor's office to make sure that classified as essential businesses and all that entailed. The supply chain issues, there were some related to transportation and trucking that we were able to work on and help get alleviated to kind of grease that process along, cut some red tape, and just generally just maintaining safe and compliant businesses throughout the process. OGA members have been open since day one, and I think we were able to show, and Kristen, feel free to chime in, but we were able to show, the governor's office, particularly the state of Ohio, kind of set an example in terms of how to run safe and compliant businesses since day one. So that's been the message that we've tried to portray through different regulations and orders and all that entails. But also, in terms of COVID, I mentioned that a lot of the brunt of what the legislator, at least initially, came back to address was distribution of money from the federal government, the CARES Act. They passed that, alleviating, what we're doing today, virtual meeting, allowing, state government, state councils, other entities to meet virtually as opposed to in person, and other related COVID measures like that, extensions of deadlines, cutting of red tape, those sort of things. But that doesn't mean there are other things that were percolating out there, particularly a couple labor of love items, I would call them, that OGA has been working on for quite a while, that we were successful in getting done this year. I mentioned, and I think we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but the auxiliary container legislation. Gosh, I don't know, Kristen. OGA has been working on that for years to try to get a solution, try to get a uniform solution, preemption at the state level, and I think COVID definitely expedited that a little bit in terms of actually getting something done over the finish line. I think there were some concerns from the administration about local control. That is what we were up against. And the safety concerns about reusable bags certainly played into it in this COVID world. And, we were finally able to get legislation passed earlier this year that will go into effect in January, that would create a 1-year delay or preemption for any local or municipal ordinances related to plastic bags or really any other auxiliary container. And so while that's not necessarily the solution that we had initially hoped for, we consider that a success in terms of getting that time to kind of work on what's next from the industry perspective. And particularly now with COVID, I think it was critically important to get some legislation passed that would stop a lot of these local ordinances from going into effect. Chris,
Yeah, Joe, I'm sorry, Joe. I'll chime in here when you're done.
Okay. Then a couple other items. Chris, you can go to the next slide. We're successful. I'll talk a little bit about some alcohol policy again, and I don't think Wylands is on the call today, but particularly shout out to Wylands. We were able to get legislation passed that would allow select agencies, liquor agencies, the ability to do full pour cocktails within the confines of their agency location. That I think that's another feather in the cap in terms of or option to create some parity and allow grocery stores the ability to do that in addition to that they're already doing with wine and beer in their stores. And then one of the big pieces of legislation, priority legislation that the legislature passed this year that OGA supported was civil liability immunity protection for businesses. And this was a big one. It essentially would extend those protections related to COVID, related to the COVID pandemic through the end of next year. So giving some protection, legal protection for grocery stores. And I already mentioned the auxiliary container, but a couple of the other things, the hemp program was rolled out earlier this year. And so, we continue to have, as those rules and regulations were implemented, making sure that those, the voice of the retailer in that supply chain process was heard as those guidelines were implemented and rolled out. So that's just a snapshot. There's many other, as I mentioned, we tracked over 100 bills, but just a few of the items that we were successful in getting over the finish line. And I'll talk about a little bit later, but 2020 is not done yet. So there's still a few more weeks of the General Assembly before they reset and start again. And so we're continuing to work hard on getting some bills across the finish line.
We should add that on that COVID protection against, lawsuits and minimizing liability for businesses, particularly our essential businesses. One of the things that we spent a lot of time on is that there was an effort to include language in that bill that would have allowed a workers' comp claim, essentially, that would have made it de facto, these are my words, but de facto, that if you were working in the store and you got COVID, that it was automatic that you could apply for workers' comp, and that they would essentially say that you did get it on the job. And so that had huge implications for your workers' comp premiums, and we worked hard to get that taken out of the bill, and ultimately we're successful in getting that taken out of the bill. So it ended up just being a positive bill for the industry, and not a problem.
Yeah, so shifting gears, I mentioned, Deb, feel free to chime in on this as we move forward. So 2020 is not done yet. We're nearing the end of the 2-year General Assembly. There's still a lot of priorities for the legislator to try to get done over the next couple weeks. And I listed a couple there, but one of the things they typically will pass in an off budget year is a capital appropriations bill, and this is typically your funding for construction projects across the state or other school facility projects, local municipal projects. And given COVID, it's typically done in the spring. That was not addressed, and obviously, given the fiscal state, I'd say, of the state, there's still a lot of questions on what they can do and what they're going to pass. It does seem like they're probably going to pass a watered down capital bill before they recess, particularly for construction projects. But we have to be determined on that. These are all still kind of percolating out there.
But in general, not many of that really affects us directly. Is that correct?
Generally not.
No, it doesn't. It's typically for your, like I said, your construction projects through ODOT. Right.
But it'll be their focus, is what you're saying. Understood.
Yeah. But
gotcha.
we always do try to watch the bill in a normal year, because sometimes they do attach other policy items. And a few years ago, they were considering some tax related stuff to it as well. So we always try to watch it for that reason. And then a couple other, criminal sentence reform, the outgoing president, this has been a passion project of his for a number of years. And so there are a couple bills moving their way through that that would, reduce low-level offender offenses and other things. I mentioned House Bill 6 earlier, that we expect perhaps something to get done on that. What gets done, we don't really know. This is at the heart of why our former speaker was indicted, and there are different approaches to that in terms of whether you repeal the whole thing and replace it with something, or you repeal just the portions that dealt with the nuclear kind of bailouts or subsidy that was in the bill. And so they're still diligently working on that and trying to get done. They have done some other COVID-19 related extensions. I mentioned earlier the letting public officials meet virtually, that sort of thing. Also to note, I will add that there is an effort, particularly in the House, but also in the Senate. There are a number of bills that would try to rein in the governor's authority to do some of these public health orders, and there are a number of bills that are moving their way through that we expect that if they did pass, the governor would veto them. But the legislator is very keen to try to pass some legislation that would rein in his authority.
They've been very frustrated that they felt like they did not have a voice in the ultimate policies. Many of them, I shouldn't say it's universal, but there are a lot of leading Republicans that have been frustrated by some of the orders. And so they recognize the governor will probably veto them, but I think they're trying to make a statement in terms of passing something. In fact, there's a committee that was meeting this morning, I think, to move out one of those bills in an effort to try to pass it even yet this week through the legislature. So there's a lot of tension between the governor's office and some of the legislative leaders as it relates to COVID and COVID response.
Chris, you could go to the next slide. And I'll add too, what other surprises? We still don't know. There's still a couple weeks left. There usually is a Christmas tree of sorts bill that they try to attach last minute things to get done. So we're obviously going to be watching to see what else happens over the next couple weeks. So what do we expect for next year? Well, Deb already mentioned the leadership teams are set, and so that those new teams will take place when they come back in January, probably like mid-January, we think, is when they'll get sworn in, and then it is the budget year, as Kristen alluded to. That's going to be the top item to tackle for the first half of the year. It should come as no surprise, but the state is in a sort of fiscal dire strait because of COVID, and all the agencies were instructed to propose their budgets with cuts, and there are more cuts that are likely going to be needed. So where does the state get the money? I think that kind of is a good segue into terms of what we're expecting. I think members should probably, not be surprised if we see some excise tax increases proposed. Alcohol, tobacco, those sort of things. Maybe some other fee increases, other regulatory items that could be included, but
sure, we'll be looking for the cat too. We'll be watching the cat closely as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. I think everything's on the table at this point. I don't think the General Assembly is overly keen to do wholesale tax structure changes, but I think that there is a people understand, the legislator understands, the governor understands that they're going to need some money to fill a budget shortfall. So where do you get that money? That's the biggest question. hanging out
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. In this past year, so the state has over $2 billion in the rainy day fund. And the governor made the decision to not tap into any of that money in this current fiscal year, and just worked with his state agencies to reduce expenses, including things like having state employees be forced to take so many days off unpaid, essentially, to help reduce expenses for the year. And they're looking at lots of different ways to do that. And they felt confident that they could finish the current fiscal year without dipping into the rainy day fund. At this point, they have indicated that they expect that they might dip into it then as they put together next year's budget. But I'm suspicious that they would use all of that. So he has his Office of Budget and Management working on that plan, working with agencies, asking them to consider where they could cut expenses, also where they might be able to find revenue that isn't general revenue. And they're saying that they're going to roll out the budget by the 1st of February. So we will, work obviously through December and January to try to learn a little bit more behind the scenes about what they might be proposing. And then certainly we'll see whatever their final proposal looks like, at least from the governor's office, probably around the 1st of February, before the legislature really starts to take up the bill.
And then, great news regarding the vaccine that we're hopeful will be starting to be distributed early next year into next year. But I think, we're still going to be living in the COVID world. So what does that mean in terms of other public health orders that would impact businesses? I would fully expect those to continue, some of the ones that are in place now. But we don't really know. This year has taught us, I think next year will too, that it's hard to plan for tomorrow in terms of the COVID world. So things change rapidly, and depending on how the winter goes, we just don't really know in terms of what to expect. So I think because of that, we need to expect that there will continue to be some orders out there that could impact businesses. And then what next on plastic bags? I mentioned that the legislation that was passed would put a 1-year moratorium, but that does run out. And kind of what's next on that in terms of policy, I think is something that it's going to have to be collectively determined by the industry over the next couple months. So that's kind of what we expect. There's a lot more that we don't know. It will be a busy 2021. Obviously, it was a very busy 2020. But given the budget and what the industry typically, works on in a budget year, we expect 2021 to be equally as busy and in that sort of regard. So I'll turn it back over to Deb if you have anything else to add, but I'll turn it back over to Kristen.
I would just add that we'll continue to work. We work through, Kristen to take direction in terms of what the association, wants to do, what positions you want to take on bills or executive actions, et cetera. So we will look forward, over the next, 6-8 weeks working with Kristen and the Government Affairs Committee to see if there are other specific, either proactive things or issues of concern that OGA, wants us to work on and wants us to be aware of for 2021, and go from there. Look forward to working with any of the members on your concerns around government relations. So, thanks.
Great. Well, thank you, Joe and Deb. Great update as always. I do have just a couple things. Probably, maybe what may be top of mind for you guys is the latest mask ordinance that just came out last week. We've been trying to communicate through our weekly checkouts and our special alerts what exactly is happening. And if you pay attention to tomorrow's Keeping Up with Kristen, there's a longer explanation. But basically, here's where we're at. The order is as it is. There have been no changes. There have been no concessions. So what I advise our members to do is to read the order and follow it as, with good faith compliance as closely as you can. We did send a letter to the administration expressing our strong concern over the fact that, we're becoming the enforcement agencies and we're becoming, the entity that would get punished with a warning and then, gosh forbid, up to and including a 24-hour shutdown. In between the lines, we've kind of heard from the administration, though, that unless there's a blatant offense to this, that there likely won't be shutting down an essential business. But that's hearsay, right? So we are encouraging you to really put into that good faith compliance for what's out there. We encourage you to make sure you have that compliance officer in place. You have that mask sign up. OGA has provided you with that. Make sure that you're really doing good faith work to try to get everyone in your store to have a mask. We did make it clear to the governor that we stand with him in the fact that we feel everyone should be wearing a mask. If our employees need to wear a mask, then, gosh darn it, so does the customer. But he also made it a point to say, in no way does he expect you to put your employees in any kind of harm's way to make this enforced. So, again, I just encourage you to read it. It'll be, again, in tomorrow's Keeping Up with Kristen, all of the, thanks, Ron, for putting your mask on. They do encourage, I do encourage you to read that and to really kind of pay attention with that, because there are several things. And I know we put out the store mask where it says it encourages you to wear the mask. I'm encouraging you to use that particular signage specifically because if you have an inspector now, it'll be a BWC person, or it could even be the health inspector, because they both have now the authority to come in and address this. So put that sign on that the state put out so it's easily recognized by these inspectors, if you will. So they were in, I believe, today's weekly checkout, and they'll certainly be in tomorrow's Keeping Up with Kristen if you need that. So that's kind of where we stand. We're still waiting on clarification. You still can ask for proof for any kind of ADA issues, or, if they can't wear a mask, then you just kind of have to take them at will. So the last thing I'll say about masks is if you would get a warning or again, gosh forbid, notice to shut your store down, please contact me immediately. I would like to know, who this is happening to, and so that we can then go back, and with Joe and Deb and kind of work the legislature, not the legislature, but work the administration to say, look, how are you closing down an essential business? And how are you doing it during these holiday seasons when, our businesses are up anyway? So, not sure what we can do for you then, but certainly know that your voice will be heard loud and clear for us there. So I wanted to talk about that. Then I've got two call to actions for you here today before I let you go. One is on the bag situation. We talked a lot about our auxiliary container bill and the fact that, we were successful in getting the bill passed, and what puts a 1-year moratorium on any kind of local bans or fees in plastic bags. But we do recognize this is a 12-month solution. So we've decided at our last board meeting that we were going to create a separate committee of members, not just board members, but members in general, to sit on this board. So what this task force will do will be to decide and come up with suggestions on how exactly as an industry do we want to approach this issue, because it's going to come up again. It's going to come up after this 12 months, and this locals are going to go right back to trying to put their bans in and trying to put their fees in. And I do think the governor will lift this unless we're successful in keeping it going. But in any case, I think we as an industry need to have our clear plan of action. So if you would like to be a part of this task force, part of the discussion, part of the deciding guidance policy, please email me with your interest, and we will put you on that task force. We probably won't meet until first of the year, but we'd like to try to put that together now. So, and I know I've got a couple of you already have said that you would like to be on it, and I've got you on that list. But if anyone else would like to be on that, please again email me, and we'd love to have your input on that. And then lastly, I think I would be remiss to talk here today and not put a plea out for, last year we just started our PAC campaign where we were raising money for our PAC fund. That got cut very, very short due to COVID. Our focus went elsewhere. Everyone's focus went elsewhere, and our PAC fund is scarily low right now. And as everything you heard here, and Joe was talking about what we can expect for next year and what we'll be, lobbying against and for next year will be a lot. So we really do need that support in your PAC funds. Again, these are personal funds, so I do need a personal check from you on this, but we'll be sending out a campaign asking for your PAC donations. But if you've never given before, now is the year we really need it. So that's my plea. I do hope that you consider giving to the PAC. It will go for a good cause. As you said, we tracked over 100 bills, and that's a lot of legislators to talk to. So we really hope that you'll be a part of that way. So I guess now we'll open it up to any last questions you have for myself or for Joe and Deb on anything else, whether we mentioned it or not. Anything else on your mind?
I don't have any questions, Kristen, but real quickly, if anybody's looking for sanitizer, gloves, mask, any of those things, we're in really good shape with that stuff right now. Have them get a hold of us.
Okay.
Gloves there for a while. We weren't taking on any new business because everybody was on allocation. That's kind of full circle. The motion activated sanitizer machines, we're giving those away with purchase of sanitizer. So we're in pretty good shape on that kind of stuff. We're still having trouble getting Purell, but there's other products that are on the market. So if you got anybody desperate for like gloves and things that they need just to operate, have them let us know. I don't know how the other vendors, what kind of shape they're in, but I know a couple months ago, we wouldn't have been having this conversation because we were trying to take care of our existing customer base, but we're in good shape now. So.
Thank you. So that's Lapari. For those of you that don't know, Ron White, that's Lapari.
Yeah, but if anybody's having problems, even from a manufacturing standpoint, if you need anything like that, we'll figure it out how to get it to you. So, okay.
Thank you, Ron. Yes.
Sure.
Kristen,
Anything else?
just
Go ahead.
a brief question. It's probably subsumed under what you mentioned about accommodations, but in looking into the various orders from the governor about COVID, trying to research what to do with employees who prefer to wear the shields to the masks. I discovered that for public schools, the shields are not an acceptable alternative except under very specific situations. Has that come up and been discussed? It's a question I'm not sure I want to ask. I've spoken
Yeah.
with the local health department, and it's a choice of discretion, and I just want to know if you have gotten into that specific issue.
I have. So I have spoken with the health department directly on this issue, and the general ruling, if you will, is the fact that a face shield does not
Yeah.
replace a mask. So if they want to wear a shield, they really need to be wearing the mask as well. And again, there are some very limited exceptions to that, and I guess it would be some sort of, ADA health, related issue. But the fact that, there's the opening at the bottom and there's not a lot of coverage, under the chin, the health department ruled that one cannot replace another. So I know it's probably not what you wanted to hear, but that's,
No,
that's kind of.
thank you. I'm aware of
Yeah.
that, and um, I do have a couple employees who have justifications. Some of the others may not. So I just wondered if that has come up as an enforcement issue other places. I know the public has differing opinions on the whole spectrum.
Yeah. Yeah, I know, but I was getting this from our main health department contact, and so I feel pretty confident that's where we're at.
Okay.
Henry, I'm sorry, was there something else?
No, just thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome. Henry, I got your email, and yes, you did hear me correctly. You cannot ask and require proof. That goes against ADA and HIPAA laws. So you have to kind of take them at their word. So that's the word we got from the Ohio Health Department. So I'm not sure if you're hearing, you can't get a straight answer from you're local, but yeah, that's what we're hearing from Ohio. You cannot ask, and and going even further up up the line and from the federal level as well.
Okay, well, I mean, that actually makes it easier on us because I was getting conflicting information from different local departments that some were saying we had to ask and they had to provide it, and some were saying, no, that's not part of the mandate. So thank you for clearing that up.
Sure.
Is that just for customers or is that for employees as well? Customers.
I think
I think
that's
it's just
customers.
for,
That's a good question. Can either of you answer that question? Joe or Deb?
I don't know off the top of
I
my
don't want to
head.
say definitively, but it's my understanding that the an employee, if they have a medical condition and can't wear a mask, does have to provide some sort of proof.
That's my same understanding also. And I have one or two that cannot wear them and I make them keep it on them. They've actually reduced the size of it and attach it to their name badge, just in case the health department comes in, because I did have the health department come in because of a customer complaint. This was pre of the updated mandate.
Mm.
And customer complained because our employee wasn't wearing one, and she showed him her medical doctor's excuse and everything was fine. So if you have an employee that doesn't have them, yeah, the health department could come in and they're going to want to see that.
Yeah.
But for customers, there's no proof required. I mean, you just have to take them at their word.
That's their word. Yeah.
Yeah, we've heard of some retailers that have chosen to have like the face shields available, but that seems pretty onerous in terms of there's certainly not a requirement that you have to make that available for somebody.
Yeah, I would imagine those are a little more expensive than masks.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and that's the other thing in that order you'll read where it talks about reasonable accommodations. So if someone comes in and refuses to wear a mask, you're supposed to suggest another reasonable accommodation, be that online, curbside pickup, that kind of thing. Now, if your store doesn't have such a thing, you obviously aren't forced to do that, right? But this is where the uncertainty and clarification from the governor's office is frustrating because I've asked that particular question. What do you do if there is no better accommodation? So I don't know how many of you have curbside, have online. I don't know what's going to happen if a customer tries to walk through your door and you say, nope, can't do it. Why don't you come home? Why don't you go home and put it online? I'm not sure how that's going to go down. But anyway, just like I said, I just encourage you to read that entire order and do what you can on all aspects of that. And if something changes, of course, we will be out there as soon as we can, but I don't anticipate it. With then he added the curfew just this week. And then I think it's tonight, guys, right? That he's got another press conference coming on tonight. Is that right?
He has one this afternoon. It sounded like, based on the fact that he added the curfew on Tuesday, that he was not necessarily going to come back with more guidance today, but that also seems like it's ever evolving. So
yeah,
we'll be watching to find out if there's anything new at 2:00 today.
Absolutely. So, all right. Anything else? All right. Well, thank you all for joining us. If you have any other questions, feel free to shoot me an email and we'll get back to you. I appreciate your time this morning. I hope you found this helpful. Joe and Deb, great job as always. Thank you so much for your partnership and your guidance, and what you do for OGA is just invaluable. So thank you so very, very much.
Thanks for having
And
us.
the rest of you, I hope you have a prosperous, busy, safe, and wonderful Thanksgiving holiday. So thanks so much for being a member of OGA, and we'll see you. We'll leave you alone. We'll see you in December. How's that?
Thank you.
Thanks.
Well, Kristen, thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.